All right. Good evening and welcome. Hello, everyone. Hi, my name is Golan Levin. I'm professor of electronic art and co-director of the Frank-Ratchye Studio for Creative Inquiry at Carnegie Mellon University, which is our laboratory for atypical, antidisciplinary, and interinstitutional research at the intersection of arts, science, technology, and culture. It's Tuesday, April 5th, 2022, and I'm delighted to welcome you to a two-evening lecture series of presentations by the creators commissioned for Shall Make, Shall Be, which is a game arts residency program produced by the studio in which 10 artists, game designers, and collectives were selected through an open call to create playable artworks themed around the individual amendments in the Bill of Rights, one game per amendment, drawing on their effects, interpretations, and legal meanings in US culture. These works that you'll be seeing are meant to be understood as critical games, using the mechanisms of play to critique and inform our understanding of civil liberties in the 21st century. A few credits to begin. The Shall Make, Shall Be project was conceived by our friend and studio curator-in-residence, Luc DuBois, who is co-director of the programs in integrated design and media at the NYU Tandon School of Engineering. We're thrilled to announce that the games we commissioned will be exhibited this summer in an exhibition at the Grand Rotunda of the Federal Hall National Memorial in New York City, opening July 4th, 2022. The commission's exhibition, forthcoming monograph, and even the words I'm speaking were organized in close collaboration with Luc DuBois, as well as editorial director Lane Nooney, assistant professor of media and information industries in the Department of Media, Culture, and Communication at New York University, and curation and exhibition director John Sharp, who's professor of games and learning at Parsons School for Design at the New School in New York City. The United States Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the US Constitution, are an integral part of US political discourse and form a core set of beliefs for the civil religion of the United States. Our understanding, misunderstanding, and varying interpretation of these rights and their implications are foundational to much of what unites and divides us as a nation. By reframing as rights those liberties that in the 18th century were available only to a privileged few, the 10 amendments provide us with a 10 commandments in reverse. Rather than prescribing the behavior of the individual, they create explicit restrictions on what the higher power, in this case the government, can do with regard to its citizens. The US Bill of Rights is really the napkin sketch for our understanding of what it is to be an American. Like all sketches, it leaves lots of room for interpretation. In the Shall Make, Shall Be project, we hope to highlight how games, which operate by proposing and enacting new modes of direct participation, can help us improve our cognitive model of the Bill of Rights. Games are an ideal medium for accessibility, accessibly, educationally, and critically exploring the mechanics of the US Constitution. It's an interactive schoolhouse rock for the early 21st century. This has been our goal and hope for the Shall Make, Shall Be exhibition, to share 10 works that give us a space to consider the underlying foundations of the American experiment and the identity and life these 10 amendments created. We believe these 10 works will help us see new paths forward to pursue a chance at life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Finally, a word from my perspective at the studio. Today, our rights and responsibilities as citizens are being contested as never before. Evolving interpretations of the Constitution both reflect and perturb a rapidly changing world, impacting everything from the fabric and daily life of American society to our survival as individuals and even as a species. Meanwhile, accelerated by the COVID pandemic, games have overtaken the global film industry and also broken through to serious credibility as a mode of critical and contemporary art practice. The Shall Make, Shall Be project, straddling contemporary art, game design, popular media, social activism, and constitutional law, is precisely the type of adventurous and interdisciplinary investigation that we hope to foster. We're proud to present this timely reflection on the rights that govern our lives as refracted through the lens of this vital and popular medium of interactive games. The schedule for tonight will be as follows. The artists are presenting in order of the Bill of Rights amendment that their project addresses. Lexa Walsh will present at 5:10 p.m., Andy Malone at 5:30, Vitrine at 5:50 p.m., Cherisse, Datu, and Latoya Peterson at 6:10 p.m., Shawn Pierre at 6:30, and then a panel of tonight's speakers, which is led by John Sharp and Luc DuBois, will be organized from 6:45 until 7 p.m. And please don't forget, we'll have another 5 presentations tomorrow. If possible, I'd like to just welcome into the chat right now Luc DuBois, who conceived of the Shall Make, Shall Be project. And if he can show up and say hello. we'll be seeing more of Luke this week. There he is. Okay, so Luke's popped in, and so I just wanted to say welcome to all of you who are watching. Welcome to Luke. Welcome to all of the artists who participated and contributed to Shall Make Shall Be. And thanks to our collaborators in New York at NYU, at Parsons School of Design, and at the Studio for Creative Inquiry for helping realize this project. We are now going to take just a 5-minute break, and in about 5 minutes, Lexa Walsh will begin her presentation on a game that deals with the First Amendment. See you all soon. Welcome back to Shall Make, Shall Be. Our first speaker this evening is Lexa Walsh, who makes projects, exhibitions, publications, and objects employing social engagement, institutional critique, radical hospitality, and community building. Her upbringing as the youngest child of 15 informs her work, as does practicing collectivity while coming of age in the post-punk scene of the 1990s Bay Area. Embedded in her practice, she works as an arts laborer, organizer, curator, and archivist. Walsh has founded or co-founded several arts platforms, including the Heinz Afterworld Lounge, an experimental music venue, Toykestra, an all-women, all-toy instrument ensemble, Oakland Stock, a branch of the Sunday Soup crowdfunding network, and most recently, the Bay Area Contemporary Arts Archive, a platform for the preservation of arts ephemera. Walsh has also worked as an artist in residence and or curator at a variety of arts institutions, including a term as social practice artist in residence at the Portland Art Museum, and several years as a curator and administrator at CESTA, a Czech art center. She holds an MFA from Portland State University's Art and Social Practice program and a BFA from California College of Arts and Crafts. Friends, I'm pleased to introduce Lexa Walsh.
Hi, thanks, Golan, and thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm going to do a little screen share. Okay, I'm Lexa, and yes, I am youngest of 15 children. We grew up outside of Philadelphia, and I do feel that this family unit informed my practice a lot. I'm the one with the pigtails. And then I grew up and turned into a musician and artist, probably to the dismay of my family. But I think that this band, Toykestra, that you heard about already for a second, informs very much the way I approach my project for Shall Make, Shall Be. We are 5 women who played entirely toy instruments and small instruments. And these are mostly analog or small electronic instruments that we would plug into contact mics. And we toured all over the place, in Europe especially. Here's an example of a song. So jump forward 15 years and I'd been playing in bands and doing participatory projects, art projects, and I didn't really know how to talk about them. So I decided to go to graduate school and got an MFA in art and social practice and came out with a way to collectively describe my practice, which is hospitable democracy. And I call it a platform for multiple voices across power structures for people and objects. The objects part is another discussion entirely, but some of the platforms I use are the table, the community cookbook, the museum and its pedestal, and sometimes the thrift store, the public square, the archive, and a whole lot of collective making of song and cheer and dance. So over the years, I've done tons of projects, bringing people together to write jingles or songs about art or songs about work, or protest songs, or songs about cabin fever. And in 2013, I was invited to work with the Oakland Museum of California's Natural History audio archives. And with those and collected sounds from the museum, I made basically a toy instrument called Soundstation. And this project I'm talking about because my Shall Make, Shall Be project is very much based on this. So throughout the program, this was for a show called We Customize. The instrument and many other people's works were developed and played and customized throughout the time that the show was on. And it had loops and accent sounds and We banged our heads with it. That was the the red-tailed hawk. And children of all ages came to play. One of the security guards, Beverly, used to come in during her break. So that project and how that was played basically informs my project for Shall Make Shall Be. I am working with the First Amendment, freedom of religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances.
What does free speech for us Americans mean? It means the government can't stop us from expressing ourselves. It can't silence us.
So in my project, like in the sound station, I have loops of sounds that express education about the First Amendment, people expressing their First Amendment rights, sounds of religion, sounds of protest, sounds of the press. And by playing this, you too are able to express your First Amendment rights. And I even express my own by fair use, by taking samples. So this is the board that will be built. It's being built in New York, which is why I don't have a picture of the actual thing. The components are the board with sound, and there are images similar to the ones from Oakland Museum. There are 9 long play loops and 17 accents, and there's going to be signage about how to play. So you can play polyphonically. So you can play a loop and then play the accent sounds on top of the loop, and you can cancel them. Every time you hit the button, it starts the sound over and over again. And I'll explain that in real life with a toy instrument when we're done. There's a website with research and the full-length recordings of the samples, and also more samples because I just can only fit so much on the machine. And then you can take a deeper dive into these samples and what they represent, legal cases about the First Amendment, and then contemporary editions, because honestly, since November, when I finished the sound version of this project, every week there's a new news story about the First Amendment being tested and interpreted. And then there's going to be a zine as a takeaway, which will have a sort of punk rock aesthetic, but it's a way to bring the project home and hopefully continue the conversation. So I've taken these samples and mixed them in GarageBand, very lo-fi. And this is what the back end looks like. It's an iPack with the samples. And this is what the program looks like on the real back end. And so here are just a few examples. Here's an accent of Jimmy Sweat.
Jesus uttered these words 2,000 years ago.
I don't mind being remembered for the service I give. I know that you want to.
Damn your silicone.
That's Lenny Bruce. And then I was interested in how there's some sort of pop culture reimaginings of the First Amendment, like Scabby the Rat, and Scabby the Rat has become this kind of hero of First Amendment rights.
Scabby.
Or the cursing cheerleader, Brandy Levy.
I was a 14-year-old kid. I was upset. I was angry.
Or and I have protests that I've been to. And protests I haven't been to. interested in what happens when you listen to those together or side by side, or combine 3 different religious sounds together. Like what conversations can come out of juxtaposing these different sounds. So if you want to hear more about Toykastra, there's a great video and you can just copy that link, and then more about my practice is at lexawalsh.com, and I will stop sharing. Thanks so much. I just want to give you.
Were you're gonna demonstrate something, Lexa? Yeah, that's awesome.
Very lo-fi, but this is how you play a toy instrument.
Awesome. Lexa Walsh, thank you so much for your presentation this evening. And we're going to pick it up again at 5:30, I believe, with our next speaker, Andy Malone. So see you all in about 8 minutes. Welcome back to Shall Make, Shall Be. Our next speaker is Andy Malone. Andy Malone holds a Bachelor of Architecture degree from the University of Detroit Mercy and has worked in the exhibit design and custom furniture industry for over 25 years. Notable clients of Andy Malone's include Google, Twitch, Konami, Salesforce, Dolby, LG, Dodge, HP, T-Mobile, and Bethesda Games. His playable sculptures and games have been shown in over 75 exhibitions since 1995, including 2 recent solo exhibitions, Playroom and Happy Accidents. As a curator of the game arts, Andy Malone has co-organized Game Show Detroit in 2006 at the Contemporary Art Institute of Detroit and Game Show New York City in 2011 at Columbia University. Malone also curated the Bravo Bravo art exhibition at the Detroit Opera House in 2004 and 2005. Malone currently serves as Vice President of Hatch, an interdisciplinary arts center in Hamtramck, Michigan. Friends, please welcome Andy Malone.
Thank you very much, and thank you for everyone for tuning in. So today I'm just going to talk very briefly about some of my past projects, and then hopefully that'll provide some context for my Second Amendment piece for the upcoming Shall Make, Shall Be show. Okay. So my name is Andy Malone, and I make interactive sculptures and games. For the most part, my work is intended to be physically handled and manipulated. So by pressing a button or turning a crank, drawing a picture, or moving a game piece, the viewer engages with the work and they complete its purpose. So I exhibit in traditional galleries and museum spaces, but the work is intended to be manipulated by the viewer. So to appreciate it, the viewer must break the first rule of most art spaces: do not touch. And it throws people off for a few seconds, but soon they figure it all out. So the toy-like nature of my work can be subversive. It draws the viewer in, and I actually like to call the viewer the player or the collaborator. But it also serves as an entry point for some more provocative themes. So I strive to create some meaningful experiences through interaction and community building. So I was born on the west side of Detroit in the 1970s. My mom was a teacher, my dad was a painter and illustrator. And in addition to painting and making my birth certificate or my birth announcement, my dad drew a semi-regular comic strip that was published in Detroit and Atlanta. And his work was also featured in the International Collection of Cartoons, which he was often one of the few Black cartoonists represented. So in one of these books, it featured a retrospective of Rube Goldberg. And as a child, I was fascinated by his whimsical chain reaction machines. Rube Goldberg made mechanisms humorous and relatable. And so this planted seeds for my interest in technical drawings and artistic machines. So I went to architecture school, but I did not inherit my dad's drawing abilities. So I enjoyed making autonoma and tabletop games out of wood, and I called them playable sculptures. So these prototype abstract strategy games were an attempt to interpret some theoretical concepts and game mechanics, and to explore how players interact with the environment and each other. This video was created for a gallery that was exhibiting my games, and they wanted to have something on a loop next to it so that if people could see how the game was played. So this particular one's called Meander, and the concept behind it is that everyone's playing simultaneously, and they're moving their pieces simultaneously, so they all need to be in sync. This next game is called X-Cross, and it's another abstract strategy game about shifting ideologies. And players modify their systems, or need to modify their systems of movement by whatever symbol is on the top of their piece. So X's move diagonally, crosses move orthogonally, and it's based on the conflicting philosophies of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. And this game is called Nexus, and it's these are all working titles, by the way, but it's another prototype, and it features a shifting topography. So it needs to be reconfigured to create paths and ways to victory. And also the pieces can be placed on the sides. There's a few more, but actually there's a lot more, but I'm not going to get into it because I want to be conscious of time. All these games have a basic set of rules, but I prefer to have the player develop their own rules by playing with the items and seeing what happens intuitively. So this is my favorite set of rules that someone developed for one of the games. I think if someone can follow those rules, I think they're pretty good. So my son Martin is an amazing kid, but he's adverse to most forms of competition. And so Quaturn is a game that I developed that I made with the intention of creating something that he would enjoy. So this is a simultaneous turnless game. So when people playing it don't need to wait for everyone else to play. They are all playing at the same time. And so everyone needs to be syncopated. And what you're doing is it's essentially a game of Connect Four for 4 players played on a rotating board. So you're trying to the goal is the same as Connect Four, try to get 4 in a row. So this I believe that like this game's very immersive, and I believe that that's when you have a game that's immersive, it can be called art. So my artistic philosophy is sort of a work in progress. At this moment, I would say I'm creating environments for people to play and learn and be transformed. And I love moments like this when like the traditional boundaries of the gallery are blurred and the viewers become collaborators. So that's I feel like these pieces sort of informed my work for the Shall Make, Shall Be exhibition. So with that introduction, I'm sure you're probably wondering how this sort of mild-mannered game designer slash kinetic sculpture artist became inspired by the Second Amendment, commonly known as the right to bear arms. Well, here's a quick story. Until recently, I had a pretty negative impression of guns. I never felt the need to carry one, and I didn't like the way it made people act. I didn't like the sound it made. I didn't like the damage that guns cause. So one of my friends who's a self-defense advocate, he thought it was absurd that I had such strong opinions about guns, but never fired one in my life. So he asserted that, actually I wrote it down because I didn't want to get the quote wrong. An armed populace is able to control their own destiny and not be victim of fate. And he reminded me that the civil rights movement relied on armed volunteers. So he challenged me or guilted me, depending on how you look at it, to not be afraid of the tool. So I went to visit a gun range a few times, and I'm glad I did, because it eliminated the mystery of firearms and allowed me to look at the Second Amendment more objectively. So the goal of this project was to think critically about both sides of the debate and to challenge my own point of view. So to organize my thoughts, I sort of went to the familiar comic format, wanted to create sort of a cohesive narrative. So the Second Amendment is a contentious subject. I don't need to remind you of that. And it was a tough thing for me to get my brain around, because the first thing I had to do is realize I didn't need to be an expert on it. And I wish I would have gotten that through my head before, because I was doing a lot of research and felt unqualified. But then I realized that we're all commenting as artists on these amendments. So I challenged myself to think about it objectively and not politically. And after a lot of sketches, I determined what I wanted to do was create a penny arcade style game. And so the player would approach this table, which had a puzzle, and they would complete the puzzle, and the puzzle would represent the utopian version of the amendment, and then that would trigger some animations and the music composition on the wall that is more of a comment on gun culture today. So I wanted to create like sort of a cause and effect relationship between the puzzle and the sort of messy reality. So here's the idealistic interpretation. that the Second Amendment renders any prohibitive regulations on arms unconstitutional because the founders correlated arms with perseverance and independence. So for many Americans, being armed was a way to maintain an equilibrium, and equilibrium is the operative word here, between people and the things that might do them harm. So in this utopian vision, the right to bear arms maintains a level playing field, and it also is afforded to all able-bodied citizens, no exceptions. Notice I said utopian, that's not how it is in real life. But the people should be prepared and equipped to defend themselves, to maintain an equilibrium in the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. So as the proverb says, it's better to be a warrior in the garden than a gardener at war. In other words, it's better to have a gun and not use it than to need one and it's not there. So for my project, like I said, equilibrium was the operative word, and the balance of powers is also known as a standoff, which is the title of my project. And a standoff is a stalemate or deadlock between two people in conflict. An armed standoff occurs when everybody points their weapons at each other and they all become paralyzed by the fear of mutual destruction. An armed standoff can take many forms and is popular in, or common in pop culture. Games and puzzles often distill concept ideas into simple simulations, so I wanted to make sure that I wanted to make an abstract puzzle that, when completed, sort of conveyed a sense of equilibrium or an uneasy peace. So I was drawn to the concept of finger guns as a metaphor. I didn't want to use actual guns in this project. I think that was sort of a challenge for myself to not make this about shooting things or make this about overt violence. So the gesture of using your hand to mimic a gun is often used in harmless or humorous contexts, but it has a certain power. Like, for example, in your state of Pennsylvania, finger guns were recklessly ruled that they provide a reckless provocation, which means you can actually be arrested for using a finger gun on a policeman in Pennsylvania. So I started carving the hands out of blocks of solid oak, and then I started creating the puzzle. Each block is adorned with a pair of carved wooden hands. There's ones that are 90 degrees from each other in the corners, and they're in line on the sides. So the object of the puzzle is to neutralize all of the fingers, so they're all pointing at each other, and there's no finger, or the fingers are basically canceling each other out. So that's at that point you've achieved the classic standoff. So once the puzzle is solved, there's some buttons on the front, and they activate, and they're powered up, and they activate some mechanisms on the back wall. And these drawings are an older prototype, but the concept is still the same. The back wall is a commentary on gun culture in America. The abstracted simplicity of the puzzle gives way more of a complicated legacy of racism and classism and cruelty. So when the left button is pressed, a music composition will play. And this is a music box mechanism that's triggered by the locations of bullet holes from my paper target. And this composition is called Aversion Therapy to sort of represent my initial ambiguity toward firearms. And this is an example of an accidental composition, sort of in the spirit of John Cage. It's a composition that's free of the composer's will. In other words, it's interesting, but it might not be melodic. Additionally, there will be two drums, one at 3 beats per minute and one at 45 beats per minute. And this will represent the rate of fire between a Revolutionary era musket and a AR-15, respectively. So when the right buttons is pressed, a flipbook mechanism is activated, and multiple animations will play simultaneously, creating sort of a looping collage. The animations represent data about guns in the US and images associated with guns. And it's my thought that we primarily don't talk much about the root causes of gun violence because we haven't allowed ourselves to collect the data. And so the graphs are heavily influenced by W.E. Du Bois' data portraits that he exhibited in Paris in 1900. And I believe the Second Amendment is not necessarily the only cause of this sort of this conflict, but I think it's created this polarizing effect on the debate. And I wanted this to be a little overwhelming so the player can choose to either focus on details or the larger picture. So I'd like to conclude this presentation with a quote from James Baldwin. He said, "I love America more than any country in this world, and for this exact reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually." So standoff is about appreciating the spirit of the Second Amendment while still despising gun violence. And it's also about reconciling American mythology with American brutality. And like America itself, I think the Second Amendment can be many things at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andy Malone, for sharing this incredible work with us. And we will pick it up in just another few minutes at 6:50 p.m. with Vitrine, whose work deals with the Third Amendment. See you all soon. Welcome back to Shall Make, Shall Be. Our next speaker is Vitrine, whose commissioned project considers the Third Amendment. Vitrine works in digital and traditional media to examine the relationship between ecological and social patterns. A Vietnamese-American artist based in Washington, D.C., Trinh graduated from the University of Richmond in 2019 with a BA in Visual and Media Arts Practice and Leadership. She's currently an MFA Fine Arts candidate at Goldsmiths University of London. Much of Trinh's work is based in and on the internet. Through her interactive digital art, Trinh explores dynamics of power and control, freedom and restraint, and how they manifest in networked media. Themes in Trinh's work include aesthetics in ecological emergency, new temporal realities created by very large phenomena, and the contradiction between the internet as a seemingly free and democratic space and the reality of the internet as a site of exclusionary design, extractive corporatization, technologized colonialism, and the perpetuation of white supremacy. Friends, please welcome Vitrine.
Hi, everybody. It's so wonderful to be here. I'm going to start my presentation now. Thank you, everybody, for being here. So my project for Shall Make, Shall Be is called Cyber Soldiers and Cyber Houses, and it's based off of the Third Amendment. A little bit about me. First of all, I'm actually currently based in London because I'm in my master's program at Goldsmiths in my first year. But before that, before I talk about the project, I'd like to talk a little bit more about my previous practice and the context that sort of brings to this Cyber Soldiers and Cyber Houses. So my first project, the project immediately preceding Cyber Soldiers and Cyber Houses was a series called the Bunker Series. And the Bunker Series is a series of post-apocalyptic interactive internet art pieces that take place in various bunkers, and players explore these bunkers through various rooms that reveal more and more about the people who built the bunkers. The first piece in the series is called Escape. And Escape takes place in an underground bunker and is based off of Plato's allegory of the cave, and deconstructs exclusionary aesthetics and guilt and responsibility at the end of the world. And the second piece is called The Station, and the station takes place in a space station, obviously, and is based off of the myth of Sisyphus and functions as a critique of nostalgia as a weapon of ideology, specifically against historically marginalized people. And the third piece in the series was called Atlantis, and Atlantis is based off of Plato's Atlantis and takes place underwater and explores an optimistic post-apocalyptic society, because I sort of made this piece during the pandemic, and all this post-apocalyptic sadness was really getting to me. And Atlantis was also the first 3D piece with 3D modeling and 3D movement of the player. And so all these pieces sort of feature narration from two AI characters that are in conversation with each other, and that serve as mouthpieces of their creator's ideology. And so Cyber Soldiers and Cyber Houses, or the Shall Make, Shall Be project that I'm doing, was created with the sort of same form and template, featuring something akin to a bunker and featuring narration from two AI characters. And so the Bunker series was really my first foray into digital interactive internet art. And the series started in 2019. And ever since then, I've sort of continued down this dark path of digital internet art, which has continued actually into both the Shall Make, Shall Be project and this current project that I'm working on. That was sort of a direct response to the Shall Make, Shall Be project. So my current series is called Hot Potato Hot Takes. And it's a series of internet-based mini games, and each game is made in under 48 hours. It's very new and it's currently ongoing. And each game is sort of like this very nostalgic point and click sort of flash esque games that all exist on the internet as free and open access pieces. The first game is called The Yellow-Bellied Chicken Beats the Cash Cow, and it's a response to the Goldsmith staff strikes. And the staff strikes are against redundancies being made by the administration. And the game features a rubber chicken, a rubber duck, and a striking herd of cash cows. The second piece is called The Algorithmic Dragon Holds Its Own Leash. And actually, this piece is based off of the research that I did for cyber soldiers and cyber houses. And it features a algorithmic dragon, a knight, a competitive leviathan, and a leashed hydra. The third game is called Flop, and it's an effort to fight internalized capitalistic impulses of my own, where rest does not need to be productive, and it features a bunch of rolling rabbits. And the last piece in the series, currently, is called an NFT called Tyrian Purple, and this game is not an NFT, it is a criticism of the NFT and fraudulent systems. So Hot Potato Hot Takes is an effort on my part, I think, to loosen up the process of making interactive pieces, and not perfect, but done, an effort to shake off stagnancy and to respond with more authenticity and less academic distance. A sort of journal or sketchbook rather than a curated exhibition. And it's a response to my previous way of making video games that does not allow for much improvisation or free creativity, while also allowing viewers to also experience a game with no stakes and no expectations. It's somewhat of a small, insignificant experience for each player. And the series was a direct response to the process of cyber soldiers and cyber houses. And I intend to continue both ways of making this work in the future to sort of balance both carefully considered contemplative works as well as making impulsive and whimsical pieces. I'm also making sculptures as well as installation sculptures, sort of to combat my terrible computer posture. But that's a little bit for later. So the actual project, Cyber Soldiers and Cyber Houses, it's based off of the Third Amendment, which states that no soldier shall, in time of peace, be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. And so the Third Amendment historically was created in response to British soldiers forcibly staying in citizens' homes during the Civil War. Legally, the Third Amendment is what lawyers, I think, would call functionally useless. So no Supreme Court case has relied on the Third Amendment as the basis for a decision. Sometimes it gets thrown in with bigger ones to fill up the lineup, as in the case of Griswold v. Connecticut, where it was listed alongside the First, Fourth, and Ninth, where the Supreme Court upheld the right of privacy in marriage. And so this lack of precedent allows us to sort of focus on the essential and theoretical implications of the amendment rather than this dense legalese, I think, that many of the other games might focus a little more on. It's more about interpretation rather than precedent. And so what struck me first about the Third Amendment is that it's the only part of the Constitution that deals directly with the relationship between the rights of individuals and the military in both peace and war. And the amendments were written during a different time. So how do we apply these laws to present situations, especially in the case of new technological advancements? Modern war and the modern military have extended, I believe, far beyond the reaches of the original conception of the Third Amendment. And so today, rather than soldiers, we have drones. Instead of spies, we have malware. I was fascinated by gaps in law, especially how law lags behind current events. Before law, there are norms, and I'm extremely interested in how these norms crystallize, therefore, into law. Our laws are based, therefore, in the conception of physical space when they were first written. And so how do we apply these laws in cyberspace? How do we cope with unprecedented tools with unprecedented influence? How are pre-existing power structures being influenced by new technology, such as big data? And how does new technology uphold old infrastructures of inequality? So sort of one of the main pillars of my research and of the project were the 3 paradoxes of big data by Richards and King. And so they detail 3 different paradoxes. The first is the transparency paradox, which is an increase of information on individuals without the individual's knowledge. And then there's the identity paradox, which is the movement from identifying the individual to defining the individual. And then there's the power paradox. And the idea is that those already with power control and create newer forms of power that only cement current hierarchies. And this sort of matched with other pieces of information, such as the creation of US Cyberco and the DoD sort of treatment of cyberspace as an operation domain like land, air, or sea. And so these aspects are combining, I think, into these questions of how do we define these different aspects of the Third Amendment? How do we define soldier and house? How do we define consent and war and peace? So cyber soldiers in cyber house is actually the piece itself takes place in a future time after a sort of 9/11 cyber-esque attack. And so this newly created government agency is mandating countrywide cyber surveillance. And so the player has to work against the clock to clear all 65 levels of their house from planted bugs, surveillance cameras, microphones, and net surveillance. And so they are guided through 30 levels by 2 AI house helpers as characters. And I worked with Athena Husek, programmer extraordinaire, who is also in her master's program at NYU to create this project. And so Cyber Soldiers in Cyber Houses is an I Spy game. And the player has to find all the bugs planted in their house with the help of the 2 AI narrators who have nebulous loyalties. And so how to play is explained through the first 5 levels of the game. And here we have one of the example of the 4th level, I believe. And so the bugs are a camera, a microphone, and a code. And the code changes with each room, and you can check it in this key area. The player simply needs to click on the correct bug in order to find it. And if the timer reaches 0, it's an automatic game over. The player can, of course, skip the level. However, this is the person of interest profile, and each room is attached to a person of interest. If the player skips a level without finding the bug, then there is a chance that they compromise the person of interest. And compromising the person of interest adds to the score. Essentially, the player wants to get to the end of the game with the lowest possible score. And the scores in the player's name get sent to a database afterwards at the end of the game where players can compare their scores. And so all of this is happening while the 2 AI talk sort of at the player. And you'll see in the sort of voice, text-to-voice narration that whenever their voices echo, that is a direct quote from the research. As well as they also give hints sometimes in the narration. And so I'll play some of that for you right now.
Move fast and break things.
Move faster and break more.
Responsibility is not in the hands of the creator or implementer, it is on you to protect yourself from attacks. They shot you, why didn't you defend yourself?
Neither the creation of big databases, nor the application of data science to them are neutral acts.
The design and assembly of a database, the application of algorithmic techniques to that data, and decisions about people based upon the outputs of those algorithms, are human decisions made by human beings with goals, incentives, and purposes that can be sharply at odds with the data subjects under analysis.
Machines, algorithms, and technologies are not neutral entities, they were created by people with motives for certain ends. Baked into their creation and input are biases, blind spots, and fallacies. These fallacies must be actively rooted out and accounted for. If a technology is in and of itself neutral, it is a tool by which ideology can be amplified.
We are listening when you open that drawer, and when you close Pandora's box.
Yeah, so it's a relatively simple premise, but I think the simplicity really allows for conceptual cohesion. And the game was made using Blender, Photoshop, Audition, found footage, imagery, audio, and it was programmed with Unity. Most of the content is found within the AI character narration. However, in the visual design, as the player continues through the levels, the rooms become less and less literal, breaking from the traditional conception of the home as a physical space and embracing the idea of the home as including a nebulous digital cyberspace. Really leaning into that futuristic sci-fi absurdist genre that I've been finding myself in lately. And so the difficulty of the levels also increased as the player continues. How, therefore, do you hide on the internet where nothing disappears? Rather than making the bugs harder to find by hiding them and trying to erase their presence, the internet strategy is to inundate the player with an excess of information, bury the bugs underneath more and more outrageous information to overload the amount of information given to the viewer, to exhaust and distract rather than to hide. So I think one of the strengths of Shall Make Shall Be in creating games about the amendments and what drew me to this project is that laws are meant to be lived in and they must clash against reality to test their validity. And I think games are a fun way to provide that. And also as a way of game structure parallel sort of socioeconomic structure. Creating structures and rules in games mimic superstructures of any place, both government, industry, and military. Games inherently deal with a viewer's agency, and the game makers build a system in which the viewer interacts, not just hard rules, but also reward systems that push players to react a certain way. I think the connection between game system with the amendments is an extremely poignant one. And so I come from an art background rather than a game making background. So I shouldn't take for granted how immersive game is in getting audiences to interact with concepts. And because I come from an art background, I think in the past, my focus is less about making the game fun and more about expressing conceptual ideas. But I think this project was a good way to focus a little more on the actual game mechanics. So thank you everyone for listening. That's all I have.
Vitrine, thank you so much for your presentation. It's lovely. We are going to then take a quick break until 6:10 p.m. when we'll pick it up with Latoya, Peterson, and Cherisse Datu, both whose collaboration together deals with the Fourth Amendment. See you all in just a couple minutes. Welcome back to Shall Make, Shall Be. Our next speakers, whose project deals with the Fourth Amendment, are Latoya Peterson and Cherisse Datu, both game designers who started their careers in journalism. Latoya Peterson lives at the intersection of emerging technology and culture. She's currently co-founder and CXO at Glow Up Games, a game studio working on their first title set in the world of HBO's Insecure. Previously, she was the deputy editor, digital innovation for ESPN's The Undefeated, and editor-at-large at Fusion, and the senior digital producer for The Stream, a social media-driven news show on Al Jazeera America. In 2018, she launched AI in the Trap, a collaborative art project that explores the future of artificial intelligence and predictive policing through a hip-hop lens. She is currently on the advisory board of the Data and Society Institute and the board of visitors for the John S. Knight Journalism Fellowships. She's a U.S.-Japan Leadership Foundation Fellow, a USC Civic Media Senior Fellow, and part of the selection committee for the Museum of Play's World Video Game Hall of Fame. Cherisse Datu was raised on the island of Guam, a first-generation Filipino-American. She was born into Kapampangan parents who, despite not playing games themselves, fostered her love for them, perhaps because her Game Boy kept her quiet during long car rides. Charisse is currently a video producer at Bethesda Softworks. She previously worked in video at ESPN's The Undefeated and Al Jazeera's The Stream. Datu received her master's in game design and her bachelor's in film and media arts from American University. A video producer with a background in broadcast news editing and digital entertainment, she finds comfort in creating small forms of playable art to help process current events. Folks, I'm pleased to welcome Cherisse Datu and Latoya Peterson. Hey, folks.
Hi, how are you?
Lovely.
This is where we start. Yes. You want to take it away from slide deck?
Yes, I got you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, great. So that would have been really embarrassing if I started talking and you did not see my screen. One moment. Okay. There we go.
All right.
Hi. So today we'd like to talk to you about contempt, and that is what we are calling, sorry, let me hide this cameras. There we go. What we are calling a interactive exploration of the Fourth Amendment. So a little about myself, who is talking to you right now. So my name is Charisse. Thank you so much, Golan, for the introduction. So I'm currently a video producer with Bethesda Softworks. You may have known Bethesda Softworks for their titles such as Skyrim. Recently came out at Ghostwire Tokyo, and then previously Deathloop. I've been working with Bethesda Softworks since 2018. I'm sharing this B3 video from the Blades mobile game. Those are my hands-on screens, so it's literally hands-on at work. Previously, I worked with Latoya at ESPN, and before that, I was a Jolt Fellow at American University, where we studied the intersection of journalism and game design. And as you see this museum photo, we had like a 3-day sort of outside pop-up at the museum in Washington, D.C., where we invited people to talk about what was the water crisis in California. And they got to play a game and to sort of understand how water resources work. And they also got free popsicles out of it because that's how we got into play. Previously, I played around with 360 software during the time when it was really popular. And then while I was at Al Jazeera, where I met the lovely Latoya, worked there for quite a bit, and there's just a listing of some of the awards that that program won, and it's still going strong. To you, Latoya.
Perfect. So I've had 4 or 5 different careers at this point. I started out, I had a whole kind of pre-internet career path. Then I was a blogger, and I had a popular site called Racialicious, which was, big deal back in somewhere between 2008 and 2012 was kind of our heyday. And we had a collective that was about the intersection of race and pop culture, in which I wrote a lot about video games as part of pop culture, which again was not done. That led to a lot of hosting gigs, booking gigs, started writing for magazines, writing for newspapers, and guest hosting on what was then Al Jazeera International's, or Al Jazeera English specifically's version of the Screen. Also was a commentator on various things. You see me there down at the bottom on MTV's Look Different campaign. And so just talking about different things around race and different anniversaries. Eventually became, as Cherisse mentioned, I was an executive, as Golan mentioned, I was one of the executive producers on Al Jazeera America's The Stream. I got poached out of there to go to Fusion, got poached out of there to go to ESPN's The Undefeated, where I rehired Cherisse. Over there at the left is a talk that I gave at the MoMA, which was really cool. So the Fluid States of America. So my career has been looking at the contours, essentially, of how societies operate, how race functions within those societies, and overall kind of fighting for more justice and more representation for all. Cherisse and I are frequent collaborators, as seen on the next slide, where we are just about, I think, how many places we've been around the world together. It has been quite a few. So we're at Gen Summit, which was in Vienna. We collaborated on a documentary about girl gamers for Fusion. And then
2014, I think.
Yes.
2015.
Yeah, we were 15. We've done so many things. And then I think this is at Evo one year when we were shooting.
2017 Evo.
2017 Evo. And so, through the years, we've definitely collaborated on a lot of projects that have a lot to do with games and different things to do with the culture. And so, when the opportunity came up for us to make a game together, both of us now firmly in our post-journalism lives, we were like, what better time to do this, and particularly around the current events in the landscape at the time.
And so that leads us to our project on the Fourth Amendment. And you know what the Fourth Amendment is? It's the right to be protected from unreasonable search and seizures. And the name contempt came from this idea of like all the emotions, especially from the death of Brianna Taylor, a lot of the contempt we felt for how the situation was being treated, contempt of the law, which many people of color are accused of, and just generally we decided that this project would be our own way of coping with the trauma of that time, and what does it mean to be American? What does it mean to be a person of color? And so we are inspired by a lot of wonderful things. Latoya, do you want to take this one?
Absolutely. And so, as lovers of games, as well as game designers, as well as journalists, we love things that kind of bridge the two worlds. So, on the left, we have Papers, Please, which was from Lucas Pope as the creator. And it's a lot around, it's a game around being a bureaucrat, essentially. It's a very unusual game. But one of the things is it's about resistance and being complicit, particularly in authoritarian regimes. So wonderful game, won a lot of well-deserved awards. We also really enjoy the Parable of the Polygons, which again is more of a playable than a game, but it's a wonderful exploration of segregation and how do we get to a society that is so segregated when everybody says, oh yeah, I don't need everyone to look like me, and really being able to play through that bias and understand what is contributing to that type of bias we found very inspiring. And then finally, we have a piece called Brianna's Garden, which is around Brianna Taylor, the artist Lady Phoenix in this, created first an AR and then a VR experience that was created to be a safe space for the activists who were speaking out and trying to, hold the police officers who killed Brianna Taylor accountable for what's happened, and they were getting harassed. And so she created this kind of interactive garden experience as a space of healing, as a space to take a breath. So all of those projects were kind of front of mind as we were thinking about and forming Contempt.
And so that's what our intention is behind Contempt, using what Latoya just spoke of, like various forms of inspiration is sort of also our journey to sort of discovering what we thought the Fourth Amendment means and what it actually means. And so we're calling Contempt a playable exploration, where through a series of like small games or playable experience, if you really want to, be really strict about what a game is. But the idea of, do you know the words of the Fourth Amendment? Do you know that means the right of people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers? Do you know where probable cause comes from? And then there's also an experience where you're sleeping and you are awoken and you have to sort of make some choices based on that, based on the context you have. In addition, we went and interviewed some civil rights lawyers. This is Professor Cliff Sloan, who was interviewed by Latoya. and he is the legal counsel for Kenneth Walker in his case. And I'm just going to go ahead and play this clip from his interview.
The Supreme Court sometimes addresses issues of race, but the Supreme Court in the Fourth Amendment context has been very explicit that claims of racial discrimination, for example, in police practices, should be brought under the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Guarantee. And the court has tended to exclude those from consideration under the Fourth Amendment. I have to say, I think that's a very, very serious mistake, because the Fourth Amendment protects us against unreasonable searches and seizures. That's the language of the Fourth Amendment. And if there are police actions in searches or seizures that are based on race, then by definition, it's not a reasonable search or seizure.
And so during our research and working on this project, we found that, I'm sorry, this should be, say, the 14th Amendment, but race is rarely discussed around the Fourth Amendment, despite what Professor Sloan mentioned, that a search and seizure based on race is by definition unreasonable. So that leads to a question, Latoya, that we learned, or a question that we're trying to answer.
Right, with the contempt, and actually really to provoke thought into the audience, because most people don't think about their amendment rights on a regular basis. It's only generally when you need them, as when people start thinking about them deeply. And with all we've known and all we've learned, and hopefully what people learn is playing through the experience, is the question is, do we believe the Fourth Amendment is still effective considering current events? And, you know, the focus of our project is race specifically, and looking at through the lens of race around search and seizure and unlawful conduct, particularly by the police. But there's also a second element to this, which is also digital rights. And so we really want folks to be able to reflect on the fullness of the Fourth Amendment, even though we are focused on race for this project, and to think about what does it mean if the courts, if, you know, the structures that we've set up to protect us based on the Constitution are taking such a narrow view that the Fourth Amendment is ultimately ineffective.
And then we like to also sort of dedicate this project to Brianna Taylor and many of the people like her who still are looking for justice today.
Yeah, Brianna Taylor is unfortunately one of many, many folks who have been surfaced who should have cases under the Fourth Amendment. And since she was killed, I think there have been 44 cases brought to the Supreme Court. So that's just counting the ones that made it to the court docket, not all the ones that have been filed or things in circuit court. There's been 44 additional cases since then, since March of 2020. And even with that, if Professor Sloan is able to bring Kenneth Walker's case before the Fourth Amendment, we probably won't see that reflected for a few years. So we really wanted to take space at the end of the project to honor all the folks who should have been protected by this constitutional amendment and who have not been.
Okay. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Cherisse, Datu, and Latoya Peterson. We really look forward to seeing your game fully realized this coming July 4th at the Federal Hall Memorial in where the Constitution was signed. It's going to be really exciting. And I just think it's fascinating that both of you have this background in journalism that's led you to become game designers, and that it's really interesting what you're dealing with here in terms of stop and frisk is this essential place where race as in a kind of unreasonable premise for search and seizure intersects with search and seizure. So I really think it's what you're doing is an important reflection and a prompt for deeper consideration. Thank you so much for your presentation. We're now going to take another 5-minute break, and we'll be back at 6:30 with Shawn Pierre, another commissioned artist for the Shall Make Shall Be series, whose project deals with the Fifth Amendment. See you all in a few minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to Shall Make, Shall Be. Our next speaker is Shawn Pierre, whose project deals with the Fifth Amendment. Shawn Pierre is a visiting assistant arts professor at the NYU Game Center and game designer working to combine new forms of play with different types of media. His work includes voice-controlled adventure games, social deduction SMS games, and physical games where players capture others in nets. In the past, Shawn has created and worked on crowd-based interactive activities, including installments at Graceland, as well as games for major sporting events. As a member and project director of Philly Game Mechanics, Shawn works to build a community where local creators meet new people and share their creative work. Friends, please welcome Shawn Pierre.
Hi, everybody. Once again, my name is Shawn Pierre. Yes, I am a visiting assistant art professor at NYU, so I'm hanging out at the NYU Game Center. And as I just said, I also help and organize a group called Philly Game Mechanics, which, as the name suggests, is based out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And our goal is to foster the development scene in Philadelphia, supporting both hobbyists and independent developers by having meetups and game jams, social gatherings, which have mostly been virtual. And I am also a game designer, of course, working on a bunch of games, digital, physical, tabletop, and maybe outside of games, excuse me, I like to make bread every once in a while. Yeah, but back to games. I mentioned I'm a bit all over the place with the types of games I make. So just a bit about me. I'm making a lot of digital games now, but I also make live interaction games. I don't have any photos of this because normally when I play the game, I'm always running things from a computer. But I had a version of Werewolf called Urban Werewolf, where I ran an event called Come Out and Play in 2015 in Brooklyn. It's a version of the game Werewolf, and it's played via SMS with an automated moderator. So I'll talk a bit more about how it works. When the game starts, you receive a phone call letting you know that you are a villager or a werewolf, while everyone else receives a text message with a role and a 4-digit code. So you can be the florist, you could be the doctor, you could be the carpenter, or your code could be 3483. During the day phase, you receive a job, and the job was to find someone else. So if I was a florist, I would find a carpenter. I would get their 4-digit code and text it to the system. So people will be going around asking each other for their secret codes, texting them to the system. If I text once correctly, that counts as one task done. Everyone as a group needs to complete 12, or else a villager is randomly eliminated. Then, of course, during the night phase, you have a person who is the wolf, who needs to discreetly send a text message with someone's code to the moderator. Then day phase comes about, that person is eliminated, the community makes their accusations, guesses, etc. Then everyone sends the code for the person they want to eliminate, as with traditional werewolf. And just like with traditional werewolf, the game ends when the werewolf is eliminated or the number of wolves and villagers are equal. Another thing that I worked on in the past, which kind of combines some real space and digital space, is a game I worked on for the digital component of the Philadelphia Fringe Festival. I made a game called Known Sender, and it was a narrative game based in Twine. Twine is a tool that is primarily used to make narrative experiences. So with this game, you start off home alone one evening watching TV and checking your email. And then eventually you get an email from a friend who asks you for your phone number, but your real life cell phone number. So you enter your number, you send it to your friend. After that, the game becomes a slight horror mystery style game where you're receiving text messages and phone calls. And the only way to advance on screen is to respond to these text messages and calls. So you're partially playing on your computer, but you're also playing on your phone using basic SMS. So yeah, my work, it's kind of a bit all over the place. For this exhibition, I am working on a game called Blank versus Blank. It's called Blank versus Blank because when people play, I want them to add their names to the blank spots, their actual blanks, not the word blank. So if I were playing with a friend named Amber, the name of the game would be, instead of Blank versus Blank, it's Amber versus Shawn. Each time you play, it becomes a unique case special to you and the person you're playing with. So once again, I was tasked with making something based on the Fifth Amendment. And as with a bunch of other amendments, it's tied up with a bunch of different things. Okay, so We have the Fifth Amendment is no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a precedent or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia when in actual service in times of war or public danger. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. Okay, so I think to properly understand where I'm working with the game, we need to take a look at all the pieces of the Fifth Amendment. Probably the most famous one, part of it, is the part about self-incrimination. This is where you see or hear people saying, I plead the fifth in movies or on TV shows or with your friends for fun, right? They're referring to this amendment. It does protect you from incriminating yourself through testimony. And tied up all in there, you have something called the Miranda Audience, which is also pretty popular. This is when you hear someone say, read them the rights, and then someone says you have the right to remain silent, or anything you say can be anything you say can be used against you in a court of law. Those are your Miranda warnings or Miranda rights. Then after that, we also have double jeopardy. Not as much fun as the game show, but if you went through the whole process of where you were convicted or acquitted for a crime, you can't be prosecuted for a second time. There's a whole bunch of if, ands, or buts in there, but that's the general thing. And then there are some less popular parts of it. One relating to the grand jury, and the other one related to due process and eminent domain. For the grand jury and due process, basically the government, they need to act according to the legal rules. They can't violate any proceedings and basically need to be fair. And then the takings clause, which is the whole eminent domain. The government can't take private property without just compensation. The weird thing here is probably what does just compensation mean, but I'm not a lawyer, so don't ask me to go into more detail about what counts as property and what is just and whether you can give someone like a big bag of cash. So I wanted to try and make my game be as proper as possible, or use the parts of the amendment as close as possible. Most of us were able to speak to a lawyer actually about our specific amendments and how they were used in the past, and what would happen maybe in specific cases. I had a very difficult time finding a case that involved all the pieces of the Fifth Amendment, and trying to get all of this into the game felt a bit unnatural. But trying to make the game fit the legal system, that was taking away from some of the fun of the game. So, like I said, there are a bunch of moving parts in this amendment, like I'm sure with everyone else. But for my game, I'm focusing on double jeopardy, information, and the Miranda warnings. So this is how the game works, and I'll show you some images of that. So it's a two-player game. One person starts as the suspect, the other plays as the investigator. The goal for the investigator is to figure out the crime that the suspect committed from illicit crimes. The suspect, their job is to get the investigator to pick the wrong crime, a crime that they already committed, one they've already been through the whole legal system for. If the investigator picks the wrong crime, the game is over because of the double jeopardy clause, and the suspect wins. The suspect loses if the investigator picks the correct crime. So a bunch of crimes are placed on a table face up, and the suspect picks two crimes, one to be the double jeopardy crime and one to be the real crime. After they pick those, they write it down on an envelope, on a piece of paper, and they put that inside an envelope, and they put that aside to be looked at later on. After that, the two players, these are the crime cards, and this is the envelope that everything goes in. After that, the two players draw cards to decide on categories and information about each category. Both players know what categories are chosen, but only the suspect knows the answers to these specific categories. Now, all of these cards are placed in the special suspect folder, which only the suspect can use. There are a bunch of slots in the folder. It's confidential, so I can't open it. I'm sorry. These cards, this is information that's all about the suspect. So we have specific categories for favorite movie and favorite maybe favorite movie genre and hometown and favorite hobby. And the cards, and there are also cards that don't have really specific answers. So you can have categories like oldest possession or least favorite gift or last item held. So for these sections, the less specific ones, the answers are all nouns like telephone or water bottle. Both of those can be, fit the category last item held. So all of these cards are related to the crimes that were actually placed on the table, some of them related to multiple crimes. While the suspect is filling the folder, the investigator is writing the names of the categories on the note sheet. And then to make all of this official, the two players, they signed this document. The legal part of it is underneath inside the folder. Afterwards, the two players, they choose a set of what I'm calling the Miranda rights. They alternate picking a rule starting with the suspect. These are special rules that can help or hurt the player. So they need to choose wisely and choose rules at the right time. Okay, so once the setup is done, we move to the question and answer phase. During each phase, the investigator is allowed to ask 3 questions about specific categories. They can be straightforward, such as, tell me about your favorite hobby. Or they can ask for more detail, like, have you ever cried while watching your favorite movie genre? Why and why not? If the suspect ever feels uncomfortable about answering a question, maybe it's getting too close to something that might reveal the crime, they can plead the 5th. So this is where you get to use the self-incrimination part, but only a limited number of times. You can't just say it whenever you want. Of course, they can do this just to throw the investigator off. It's all part of the game. The suspect can then answer these questions truthfully, or they can lie. And you may think that it's pretty easy to fool the investigator by just lying, but after the 3rd question, the investigator gets to guess how many of the suspect's questions were lies and how many of the suspect's answers were lies or the truth. If the investigator gets that part right, they can gather more information on what you specifically lied about and what you specifically told the truth. Investigators getting from the parts of the Declaration Amendment. I was able to map out self-incrimination and double jeopardy without straying far from the original deal too much. The one I took the most liberties, I think, with was the Miranda warnings. Instead of them being something set up by law in the game, it's something that the two players need to agree on. But once they do, they'll need to make sure that they know their rights and when they can apply. In I guess the non-game real world, things can wind up poorly, if you forget your rights or someone forgets your rights. I'm looking forward to this whole exhibition, and what I'm really looking forward to is the dynamics of watching people play. And I'm really, really interested in seeing what happens when two people who know each other really well start to play. Because the people you know well, you get to know their tells when they tell a lie, or at least maybe you think you do. And then during the game, you're obsessing over them, doing small things like tapping their fingers when they answer certain questions. And I want the suspect to do their best to weave a web of deceptions, but one that I guess I'm considering fragile. Because if they're not paying attention or if they're careless, the investigator will, I guess, continue with the web thing, will pull on a thread and eventually the entire web of lies will collapse. I guess I can finish by saying it's funny because working on this is, when I was working on this and something else, I thought my days of working on games about the deception and manipulation were over. But then this entire game is about leading people on and gathering information. And I'm a terrible liar myself, and I get super guilty over any type of lie that I tell. So anytime I try and play this game, I try and be as truthful as possible, which means I'm terrible and I lose. So the overall process for this has been really interesting. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what emerges when people play together. That is it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shawn Pierre. I really appreciate your presentation. And what we're going to do now, we're going to break for half a minute, and then we're all going to come back with the group and we'll have kind of a Q&A. If there's folks watching online on the YouTube, we can take your comments and questions from there. Otherwise, I'll sort of moderate a panel and see you all in about a minute. Okay. Welcome back, everyone. I just wanted to bring all the artists who've spoken this evening. We've got Andy Malone, Cherisse Datu, Latoya Peterson, Lexa Walsh, Shawn Pierre, and Vitrine. Thanks, everyone, so much for coming and joining me up here. I'm going to kick it off with maybe an introductory question, and I'd just love to hear your answers. And I guess my first question is, how do you see your work differently now in the context of the full group presentation?
I was really glad we had this event today, because I feel like I learned a lot about, not only about my fellow artists, but also about the amendments that they were working on. That I think that this was a great for community building, and it was also, I feel like I feel like we're now, or at least I'll speak for myself, it feels a little more cohesive as far as how my work and how I'm thinking about the amendment, and how I see everyone's got a different take and how they're thinking about the amendment and different mediums and different ways of doing it. That I can see how it all comes together now. It's pretty cool. I'm not sure if that was the question you intended to go on, but
yeah, sure.
Yeah.
How about someone else? How do you see your work differently in the context of the full group presentation, or where is it taking you?
I'll chime in that yeah, I'm just sort of amazed and blown away by the diversity of approaches, and it makes me realize that my approach is, although it is critical, it's coming from this place of play and fun as an introduction to the critical, and it might not appear that way from the outside, and it's and some people's are like sort of deep from the get-go, and but in a way I think that's going to be this interesting approach for the audiences to come and engage, and there's something for everyone to dig into.
Yeah. As the person who self-proclaimed has the most useless amendment, I think it's nice that the rest of the project sort of upholds this more sort of like somewhat more serious and actually tackling the issue instead of, I suppose, taking a sharp left turn into absurdist sci-fi fiction. And we've been, I feel like we've all been teasing each other with our games for the past year, because we've been working on this project for a long time. And it's so exciting to see how far everyone's work has come along and really crystallized into these fully realized and individual pieces that are different from each other, but have so much connections between them. I see also a lot of connections between the work and research that I've been doing and everyone else's as well. And it's very exciting to see. And I can't wait to see them all together in the context of the space.
Yeah, I want to just add that I don't know if we should fight for the most useless amendment, or if that should be a survey at the end of the experience. But I definitely want people leaving with like like a sense of humor and also like a sense of hope and like a sense of change. And I think that's kind of like the hard bit with everything, is going in like, this is the document we refer to, but who are we? Like, for example, in the Fourth Amendment, it protects persons, and so who are persons, you know? So it's just I don't want to fight over what the most useless amendment is, but I think mine could probably give yours a run for your.
I think another question I have, I mean, there's collectively this group, and there's another group tomorrow evening as well, right? There's another 5 artists presenting tomorrow night. But collectively, there's many different approaches to the Bill of Rights that you've each taken. And, you know, some of you have taken more expressive approaches that sort of just kind of are inspired by the fifth, you know, the amendment you're working with. Others are, you know, of the artists are working more in a way where like you, the player, are put into a difficult situation and sort of made to sort of feel perhaps what it's like to be in a situation where that amendment applies and impinges on you. I wonder, have you seen any approaches in gameplay in another artist's work here this evening that you now want to emulate or borrow for your own future work?
Andy's pieces look so much fun. And I've been working on sculptures of my own. It's very new. I've never done sculpture before, but now I'm ready to hop into it and really make those pieces. Yeah, there's something really physical about the way your work is, Andy, that I find extremely fun. It's very lovely.
Oh, thank you, V. Appreciate that. And I, on my end, I'm in awe of the electronic and the programming. Everyone that does that stuff, you know, without even, you know, it's no big deal for programmers to do it. But I love, I would love to learn that and love to incorporate that into my work.
I like particularly in Shawn's project an approach which it's almost like it's a game that's really best played by people who know each other very, very well. You know, and this idea that like, you know, someone's tells, and so like trying to see if each other are lying is it's there's a rich psychological space that Shawn is leveraging in your work there that I think is really important and sort of interpersonal space.
Yeah, it's a problem I have where I like seeing people mess with each other. I need to figure out why I keep doing that. But yeah, it's really one of my favorite things about making interactive experiences is watching the player stories that happen, not just during the game, but what happens afterwards, and seeing their interactions and the conversations they had and what just comes of the entire experience. And then maybe they think they can go about doing the whole thing again, play it differently, and have a whole new story to tell. So but that's the thing I also like about everything else here. Everything is allows for so much player expression during and afterwards, where everyone does walk away with something that feels unique, that feels special, that, you know, they feel like this whole exhibit was something that was tailored to them because they're able to make something so personal or get involved with something so personal. So I think that's super impressive that everyone was able to do that. And it's makes me really inspired to even continue working on this and maybe change things up just to embody some more of the spirit that everyone else has into my work.
I think also the sort of like similarities between Shawn and Lexa's pieces that I kind of want to embody the next time I make games is that the interaction is less with the game in and of itself and more with the other people who are playing with you. And I think that's amazing because it adds extra life to it and it can change every single time. And instead of fighting against, I suppose, like these large immovable systems, they become more human and more interpersonal. Yeah. Next time for me.
Well, I think this is a really good time to kind of bring things to a close. I want to thank all of the artists who are here and who presented this evening for sharing your work so generously. You got just a couple more months to kind of tidy up your installation for the presentation at Federal Hall Memorial in New York City, where the birthplace of the Constitution. Your game will be presented on July 4th. So we're really looking forward to that. And I just want to kind of announce just who we will be seeing tomorrow evening. Tomorrow evening at the same time, 5:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we will have Peter Bradley, Broken Ghost, and Moaw, which is Arnab Chakravarty, Ian McNeely, and Meander. So we're really looking forward to their presentation. Great collaboration. Danielle Isadora Butler, Ryan Kuo, and arts.codes, which is Melissa F. Clarke and Margaret Schedel. So those will be our presenters tomorrow evening. And once again, we will also have a Q&A or bit of a group discussion at the end of the day tomorrow. Thanks again, everyone, and see you tomorrow.